Hello, 21st century educators, and welcome to our interview series where we share effective practices accomplished by our very own educators right here in the Caribbean. And today we have Ms. Vikki and Ms. Sonja Gibbs-Bowen joining us to tell us about a wonderful initiative which they started at their school. And this initiative is called Tranquil Tuesdays. So welcome, Vikki, welcome, Sonja, and thank you
Thank
very much
you.
for agreeing.
Hi, thank you for having us.
So we're going to jump right in. I really am very excited to share this initiative with our educators because I do think it can have some significant impact on our education system. So what exactly is Tranquil Tuesdays?
So Tranquil Tuesdays is basically a mental wellness / mindfulness club. Okay, we decided to start a club to really focus on SEL, which is social and emotional learning. And it also ties in with a current trend in education. If we look at education in the UK and even in the US as well, you would see that they are incorporating mindful practice into the curriculum. So that was what we wanted to do for our students as well. And the club basically allows us to provide tools and techniques for our students to deal with stress and anxiety. And it helps us to really care for the whole child, which is, of course, what we as teachers are really responsible for doing. When I talk about mindfulness, I refer to MBSR, which is mindfulness, basically mindful-based stress reduction. It was created by John Kabat-Zinn, and it helps children and adults to basically cope with stress and anxiety through breathing techniques and focusing on the present. So we wanted to bring those tools and techniques to our students, and that is why we got into the Tranquil Tuesdays Club initiative.
Wonderful. And I would imagine that during the pandemic, this proved to be really significant. So what was the inspiration behind starting something like this?
So it's quite funny to us because it started off really in Spanish, right? Because we were doing a cultural coloring activity for Dia de los Muertos, and they were asked to color decorations for the festival. And Ms. Gibbs-Bowen and Sonj, she realized, she came back from the class and she said, these students are actually so focused on coloring, they're not moving. The bell went and they were still sitting down there coloring and they wanted to stay and color. And that was very strange. That was not something we had experienced before because we were so accustomed to our students, you're packing up before the bell and they're bolting out through the door as soon as the bell goes. So she said, this is something that we should consider working with because they really seem to enjoy this stress-free environment, So I myself, as an adult suffering from anxiety, I had started using color therapy as well. So I was saying, okay, this is something we could work on. But as you mentioned, it was only really when the pandemic came about that the idea came. We were like, no, we have to act on this because we had it in the making for a few months. And that's when we were still in the physical and we didn't actually act on it. And then when we went online, we began to notice changes in our students, right? So those who would have been enthusiastic and basically volunteering in class, that stopped happening. And we were concerned that, as I said in the articles, and so SEL was getting pushed out of the way and everything was just focused on academic delivery. And we decided, no, we need to focus on helping them self-manage, to be self-aware, all those things that are mentioned by CASEL, the collaborative for social and emotional learning. We wanted to really work on the core elements of that framework, which is, as I mentioned, self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, social awareness, and their relationship skills, because all of those things really suffered during the pandemic. So it was really that sort of situation that gave us the final push to say, okay, let's get this going, let's get this in action.
Excellent. Because, as an educator, I know sometimes the system really focuses a lot on academics, and we tend to ignore that side of, the emotional being. And so this is really, really lovely to hear that, you all are taking this initiative to really focus on the whole child. So what have you seen, as some of the outcomes of this program? What are some of the benefits that this program has brought to your students and to yourself?
Well, one of the things that we, of course, were hoping to have was student engagement. And I think that one of the clearest indicators that the club was having an impact was simply that the kids were coming back week after week. When we were in the virtual environment, the sessions were taking place after their classes, and yet still we would have a waiting room and kids would be in the waiting room ready to start, eager to get into the session. So they were really enjoying it. And then when we moved into the physical space, we found that there were students there were a couple of times where the space we used for the club was unavailable. And one student, they'll be asking, can we have it on another day? One student asked Vikki, I wish we could have it every day. So it meant that they were enjoying what they were doing and they were feeling the difference. I remember we would ask students for feedback, whether informally when we're having our discussions about the various topics we were talking about, or we may have different polls, and we always got positive feedback from the students that they felt that, this is something that I'm really happy that I'm doing. I remember after one of our guided meditation sessions, one of my students who is actually diagnosed with ADHD, he was like, Miss, I feel so calm and relaxed and Miss, a little bit sleepy. And I mean, if that is not a sign of relaxation, then really and truly, what is? So helping these students to feel calm, to feel a little bit that they can cope with all the various stresses that they have, it means that they are benefiting from our sessions. Because as Vikki pointed out before, the intention is to create an oasis, a space where you can just spend a moment and catch yourself, be quiet, because the school environment is chaotic and noisy, especially during the breaks, because of course, you're not under the teacher's guideline of, okay, we're in class and we're following a lesson. And in that free-for-all, sometimes that's a lot of stimulation. And that can be a challenge for some students. So we actually have one young man who he comes and he just wants to sit in the corner and listen to music. That's all he comes for. He's not big on the coloring, but the fact that he can have a space to just be quiet, not have to interact with anyone. And we check in on him to make sure that, he's okay and he's fine. I just want to sit down for a little bit and not have to talk to people and interact with people, because there are different sorts of students. Some are very extroverted, some are very introverted, and they appreciate, having that space. So we have seen that benefit from the students who would verbalize to us that, we're really glad that we have this space. And we even had parents, comment to our principal that I'm really glad that my son is attending this. I am seeing that he is calmer. I'm seeing that he is enjoying the sessions. I'm seeing that he's feeling more relaxed. And that to us is a sign that, okay, something that we're doing is helping. Because, as Vikki said, we want to equip our students with the tools that they need to navigate puberty and all that brings issues of self-doubt, of identity, image, and mental health is something that is so important and so extremely stigmatized. And even though that is fading, we really have to make sure that the boys know I have to pay attention to my mental health. Because access to mental health care is not something that is cheap, and it is not something that a lot of students can afford. Most insurance companies don't cover things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which would assist these young men, or assist students in general, in being able to navigate the world and the stresses that come with that. And we are not mental health care professionals. We do not pretend to be. But the fact that our students can have a few more tools in their toolkit to deal with anxiety, exam stress, returning to school, it means that they are in a better place. And we really are glad that that is happening for them.
Lovely. And I'm glad that you mentioned, that it's young men, it's teenagers that this program was started with, because, as you mentioned, mental health is something that we try to shy away from, and I think it's even more prevalent, mental health and young men, or mental health and men. And so this is really excellent to hear that even parents are seeing the change that this program, Tranquil Tuesdays, is bringing for their sons. So if a teacher wanted to start something like, I want to create my own version of Tranquil Tuesdays, what advice would you give to that educator?
So first off, I would think to give them some, with respect to logistics, you have to work with that first. Okay, so you don't want to start too large. That's the first thing. So I would suggest that you start with a particular year group at your school. And then, of course, you have to pay attention to time and space constraints. Do you have a space in your school that you can use that's private, that allows for that sort of quiet time? You also have to time it in a way that you begin and end at a time when they're not rushing to go to another class, or they're not rushing from a class to come to Tranquil Tuesdays, because that basically defeats the purpose of being tranquil. I would suggest as well that you pair with a colleague, especially in this time. There's one feature we have on Tranquil Tuesdays. It's a monthly music share, where the students basically choose the music that they want to listen to. We ask them to share videos of songs that help them to relax and so forth. And of course, dealing again with teenagers, with young men, you want to make sure you censor the videos and so forth. Of course, you give them the guidelines. Yes, no profanity, no vulgarity, but you need to vet the videos even as the session is going on. So it helps to have a colleague with you, because Sonja and we would actually communicate via WhatsApp. I'm vetting the videos before she plays it, and we're going like, yeah, no, we can't play this one, we can't show that one, because of the graphics. And then, of course, just because of the situation we're in right now, there was a time when Sonja was in quarantine, and that meant that 2 weeks would have gone by without the children having Tranquil Tuesdays if there wasn't a second person to run it. So I was still able to run it while she was in quarantine. So that is definitely a suggestion that I would give to someone who wants to start it. Don't go it alone. And of course, the most obvious, you have to do your research. Now, as Sonja said, we are not, and I underscore, we are not mental health practitioners. We simply have done some research. We have, we scoured the internet. We've been looking for websites that basically help us. Twinkle was one that I found was extremely good in terms of resources, inclusive resources for different topics on mindfulness, etc. But you don't have to go to Twinkle, because at some time Twinkle is also, you will have to pay a subscription, etc. But there are so many resources on the internet that are free. We have Teen Toolkit, right? We have bits of positivity.com. So there's so many resources you can look, but you don't want to start your club and then be scrambling for material. So you have to basically compile your stuff before. Now, we actually use Padlet to do that. And we basically compile according to topic, right? And you have to choose your topics based on what's happening as well with your students at the time. So while they were online, we did things like stress management, and we did dealing with anxiety, positive affirmations, growth mindset. We did those things. And then as we got closer to them transitioning back into physical school, we looked at coping with change. Right. Okay, so you have to really gear your topics to what's happening and what's going on with them. Okay, one thing I want to stress, the club is not a class. So you do not, even though you want to start with an activity that's light, and you must have a starter with your coloring, etc., you must have a closure where you do a mindful moment, whether it's breathing or meditation, where those things might be non-negotiable in terms of the running of the actual session. You have to understand you're not doing a class. So if you share a reflection sheet with them and they do it, they are not entitled to share that with you. Okay? You are just allowing them the space to reflect, you're allowing them the space to think. Because then if you force them to share, it's like they're doing a worksheet and it's a class. And that's not the environment you want to create. You want to give them that space and that freedom to share at their will. If you do group activities, you don't try to make them share in front of everybody, because remember, some of them, they're not all coming from the same class. They may not be familiar with each other. So you as the facilitator, so this is where we have to say facilitator, not teacher, right? You as the facilitator, you have to kind of walk around and say, so what do you guys, how do you feel about this question? Or what would you do, etc. So you keep it very light, and always remember, as I said, you're facilitator, not teacher.
I mean, just hearing you speak, I'm hearing, really creating a safe space. Of course, there's confidentiality, really being in touch with what is happening with your students at the time. And so it's not just, well, I feel like we're going to do X today. It really is, we are facilitating some moments of learning for our students in terms of them getting in touch with their emotions, them being able to share and know that it's going to stay there. So, a lot of things are happening underneath the surface while you plan and prepare. So I just wanted to throw out, what kind of activities, I heard you mention coloring, I heard you mention music, but what kind of activities can you suggest to educators to include in a session like
this? What we often start with is a video, okay? Because we find that draws the children's attention, but again, you have to look for videos that are age appropriate. A lot of the videos that are on YouTube that deal with mindfulness and stuff, they cater for young children. And if that's your audience, that's great. But you can't just choose a video and say, okay, this is a video on mindfulness. It appeals to 5-year-olds, it doesn't appeal to a teenager. So you have to look at those things. So we show videos, we do reflection sheets, we do, for example, hypothetical situations. So if I were in this situation, what would I do? Group discussions, and then we also, I remember there was one that we did with natural objects in nature. So how, if I were a rock, what does being a rock mean? What does a rock guarantee that kind of safety to me, And, we did techniques like EFT, which is like emotional tapping, so that you basically tap certain pressure points in your body. So we taught them to do that, right? To bring down your stress levels. We also did, and Sonja, you can help me. You can
yeah, we've looked at breathing, and we looked at the technique where you would tense your body and then relax, and we went through the entire process of, how do you do that? And I remember the kids when we were doing it afterwards, they're like, yeah, I do feel, and even I myself, because I had never tried that technique before, felt, okay, yes, things do feel a lot looser. And because we hold so much tension in our bodies, that just an activity to release our muscles helps us to release our stress, because we don't pay attention that your jaw is clenched, you're frowning, your shoulders are up, and making them aware that, hey, this is happening. So how do we undo that? It helps them. And like I said, I learned a couple of things myself as well while we were doing those.
And Sonja is always very, she's very insistent. Even as we go forward, she keeps saying, we have to reincorporate that yoga technique that we had done, because we did a few yoga sessions, and the boys said, yeah, this really helped, and nothing advanced, simple standing poses and sitting poses, etc. And one thing we do as well is storytelling. So we use the resource that I got on Twinkle, which was the cautious caterpillar, and Sonja actually read it to them as a story. Of course, there was a lesson in it that the caterpillar becomes the butterfly, even though it doesn't want to change, right? And her, the way she read it, her voice was so soothing. The way that, she spoke in the voice of the caterpillar when the caterpillar was speaking, and it really gripped their attention. It gripped my attention, and that's something we think children don't need. We do it for them when they're in preschool. We do it for them when they're in kindergarten. And, we think, okay, well, they're big enough now, they could read it on their own. But, it's so nice to have a story read to you, and it soothed and calmed them. And then, of course, it was a light way to introduce dealing with change.
Yes, of change. I just want to mention the name of the technique with the muscles was progressive muscle relaxation. It slipped my mind for a moment. Progressive muscle relaxation. So that was a technique that really helped them. We had a session on journaling, and Vikki took us through doing bullet journals. And again, something that I myself learned from, and the students as well. And you'd think, okay, guys mightn't be too interested in that, but at least you're planting a seed that this is an option of something that you can do to help you organize yourself, organize your life, organize just your day to day. Because as students, they have so many things that they have to manage with all their subjects, plus home life, plus if they're into extracurricular activities. So planting the seed or giving the ideas of this is a way that you can try, this is a way that it can be done, is beneficial.
Yeah. And one of the other things, as you all are speaking, it's bringing to attention that young men can learn techniques, and students in general, we don't always have to externalize our emotions in the sense of, we're seeing a lot of violence and we're seeing a lot of outbursts from our young people. And I think it's because they do not have the tools to treat with, when I'm feeling upset, what do I do? When I'm feeling sad, what do I do? And I'm hearing, you are empowering these young people to say, listen, there are alternatives. If I start to feel tense, if I start to feel upset, what can I do? And this is really, really excellent, and I think any educator, any student, any parent even listening to this can really begin to, let's see how else we can treat with when our students, they have real emotions, right? So even where we might feel sometimes, but they have nothing to worry about, you would hear teachers and parents and adults in general say, what these young people have to worry about, But we all know that there are stressors that even when we may not be able to understand them, we do need to teach them coping mechanisms. And so this is really excellent. So I have a question that I want to throw out to you. I heard Vikki and Sonja, you were speaking about resources that you'll access online, but we're in a Caribbean context. So have you found that sometimes it's difficult to find materials that really relate to our context, our specific context? If not, then can you share, how you all were able to choose specific resources that were relevant to the Caribbean context? And if you all did not find things that were specific to the Caribbean context, well, how did you deal with that?
A lot of the material was not specific to the Caribbean context, that is correct. But because they dealt with issues of teenagers, those are common regardless of where they are. So the anxiety of us, we had a session about returning to physical school, because you had been online and you're coming back out of a session where you've been home all this time and you're going into the physical space. How do you treat with that? What were the fears that you had to do with that? And that was something that was across the board. It wasn't just something that happened in England or the UK, right? So even though it may not be a specific of something that's happening in Trinidad, because it's dealing with universal themes of self-identity, reframing your self-talk, self-image, self-esteem, we're able to manage it in that way. Even if we may introduce the video, then we would have our own discussions and bring in our own personal experiences or the experiences of other students, in terms of these are the ways that these things may show up in your life. These are some of the examples of things you may be going through, and here are some suggestions as to things you can try to help you to cope with it.
I also think in in going forward, because of course we're always thinking about what else we can do and how to expand. We want to kind of get involved with local companies, etc.
And practitioners, yes.
Right, who may be willing to come in to speak to the boys, of course, it's very early, so we don't want to call any names, etc. But these were just ideas that Sonja and we were hashing out. And we were saying it would be great to get some practitioners who are actually licensed, in terms of yoga, etc., to come in. And because we have a lot of people locally who do it, right? So we just need to make those links and bring those volunteers into the school. We were also considering, because it's something that's very popular now in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, art therapy.
Yes.
And, Sonja will talk a little bit more about that in terms of our future plans.
Well, we can jump right in,
Okay, great. So when we started, like Vikki said, we started off with a year group, and we have been expanding. So last term for us was really a transitional stage in terms of figuring out exactly what's the best way for us to manage the club while we're in the physical space. And next term, what we want to do is to really encourage all of the students of the entire student body, even the upper school students, because we have mainly lower school students at this time. But the upper school students also have the same issues, also have anxiety, exam stress, etc., to welcome them into the fold. So we do have some ideas about targeting them to bringing them in. And at the end of the day, we want the students to have some ownership. So we would like to empower them to be leaders, to run the club. Of course, there's certain things that we would have the adults or invited guests take care of, but students can run a music share, students can run a coloring session, and so we want to give them that opportunity to be leaders within the group, and perhaps even leaders within their own circle from that. So empowering students to be able to participate, not just participate, but to run the club and do better. We, as Vikki mentioned, we would like to invite some persons to come in. And there are a couple of organizations where you can go and visit, and there are certain activities that you can do. And therefore, again, I don't want to premature say exactly where we want to go, but once we get all the relevant permissions, we would like to carry these students to these places, because sometimes outside of the school environment and outside of their own personal environment, their home environments are all very different. Some students live in a house, an apartment, etc. And therefore, carrying them to that common space where they can engage in these mindfulness activities, I think would be extremely beneficial to them. So we have a couple of things in the pipeline.
Wonderful. So, I don't know if you have any final thoughts, but I do think that you have given any educator out there, or even parents, some way to start if they are thinking about introducing a club like Tranquil Tuesdays. I see it as more than a club. It certainly is developing life skills among our young people, which they really do need. We're seeing it more and more, that they do need to have these not only coping mechanisms, but the ability to even preempt some of their behaviors, so they can sense, okay, this is happening to me. I'm aware of my body being tense, and therefore I need to now do something about it. So building that awareness, and as well equipping them with tools. Any final words that you'd like to share?
I think one benefit, we didn't mention it in the benefits. The educators themselves can benefit from running the club. There have been many times that Sonja and we've had a tough day, and when we get into Tranquil Tuesdays, sometimes we pull a coloring sheet, and while they're coloring, we color also, so it's also, and there are topics that we did that I wasn't familiar with. I'd always heard of EFT, and I wasn't really familiar with it. And when Sonja ran that session, I was like, oh, okay, this is what it is. So as an educator, you yourself will benefit from running the club. I trust me, you will.
For sure. And basically, we hope that everyone can recognize that there is value in taking a moment to just be still, to just stop and just recenter yourself, and adults and children can benefit from it.
Wonderful. So again, thank you very much to Vikki and Sonja for joining us on this interview and sharing such relevant information. I think anybody listening to this interview will leave with several key takeaways, but certainly it seems as though this is really helping to make sure that the school environment is a safe environment for our students. And we're not just talking, in terms of physical safety, but emotional well-being, which is something that we do need to concentrate on. And so I really would like to thank you ladies for joining us today. And we will see you next time. And of course, who knows where this interview will lead. Perhaps we will have a part 2 as we get questions and comments. So feel free to place your questions and comments, and Vikki and Sonja will be sure to answer them and to give feedback. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thanks
for having
us.
us.
Take care.
Take care.